The rifle gleamed in the morning sun as Jed Boone shoved his 16-year-old daughter forward, her stumble drawing gasps from the crowd gathered in Red Hollow's dusty square. $20 worth of flour and this Winchester that's all she's worth to me, he spat, sealing a bargain that would sell his own flesh and blood to the most feared man in the Colorado mountains. What happened next would shatter everything the townspeople believed about monsters and men. Stay with me to discover how a girl sold like livestock found salvation in the last place anyone expected. Comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far Lila's story has traveled. The dust hadn't settled from the morning coach when Jed Boone dragged his daughter into the center of Red Hollow's main street. October wind whipped through the Colorado town carrying the scent of coming snow and something else, the stench of a father's betrayal, brewing in the crisp mountain air. Lila Boone kept her eyes down, counting the wooden planks of the sidewalk as her father's grip bruised her upper arm. She'd learned long ago that counting helped. 1, 2, 3 planks past Murphy's General Store. 4, 5, 6 past the saloon where men were already gathering despite the early hour. 7, 8, stop your dawdling girl. Jed yanked her forward so hard she nearly fell. The worn fabric of her dress, already straining at the seams, caught on a splinter and tore. The sound seemed to echo in the growing silence as more townspeople emerged from shops and doorways. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Young Timothy Clark, who'd once shared his apple with Lila behind the schoolhouse, stood frozen beside his mother. Even the saloon girls, usually quick with a laugh or a sharp retort, watched in uncomfortable silence from the balcony. "Folks of Red Hollow," Jed's voice boomed across the square, whiskey rough and mean. "You all know me as an honest man, a God-fearing man who's tried his best with what the Lord gave him." He gestured at Lila with the disgust most men reserve for finding a snake in their bedroll. "But sometimes the Lord tests us with burdens too heavy to bear." Lila's cheeks burned, but she kept counting. 9, 10, 11 planks. If she counted high enough, maybe she could disappear into the numbers, become nothing more than a sequence that went on forever far from here. Look at her. Jed continued, warming to his audience like a preacher to his congregation. 16 years I've fed this girl, and what do I have to show for it? She can't keep house proper. Burned the cornbread just yesterday. Can't tend the garden without killing half the plants. Sure as hell can't attract a husband, not with that body that takes up twice the space it ought to. Someone in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Lila recognized the sound of boots on wood. Sheriff McKenna, probably, though he wouldn't intervene. Nobody ever did. "Pop, please." Lila whispered the words barely escaping her throat. "Not here. Not like this." Silence. Jed's hand cracked across her face, the sound sharp as a rifle shot. "You'll speak when spoken to and not a moment before." He turned back to his audience, his weathered face twisted with righteous indignation. 16 years of Christian charity I've shown this girl. 16 years of trying to make something useful out of nothing. But a man's got limits. The crowd grew larger. Lila saw Mr. Patterson from the bank, his thick fingers drumming against his watch chain. The widow Martinez stood in the doorway of her boarding house, her dark eyes unreadable. Even Reverend Blackwood had emerged from the church, his pale hands clutched together as if in prayer, though he made no move to stop what was unfolding. "Which is why," Jed announced, his voice carrying the weight of practiced drama, "I'm willing to make a bargain with any man who thinks he can succeed where I've failed. This girl needs a firm hand, someone who can beat some usefulness into her thick skull. I'm offering her up for a fair trade, nothing more than what she's cost me over the years." The silence that followed was complete. Even the horses tied at the hitching post seemed to sense the wrongness of the moment, stamping and whinnying nervously. "You can't be serious, Jed." The voice belonged to Miss Josephine. Miss Josie, to everyone who knew her. The midwife pushed through the crowd, her gray hair pinned severely back, her medical bag clutched in one weathered hand. "This is your daughter you're talking about, not livestock." "Don't you lecture me about family Josephine Walker," Jed snarled. "Spinster woman like you never had children of your own. You don't know the burden." He grabbed Lila's arm again, shaking her slightly. "Useless mouth to feed, that's all she is? Ugly as sin and twice as worthless." Lila closed her eyes, trying to retreat into that safe place in her mind where she kept her few good memories. The time before Ma died, when there had been laughter in their house. The secret sketches she made of wildflowers hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The dream that someday, somehow, she might escape Red Hollow and find a place where she could be more than her father's disappointment. "I'll give you $20 for her." The voice cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. Everyone turned toward its source, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Gideon Maddox stood at the edge of the square, having appeared as silently as smoke. He was a mountain of a man, 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sun. His face was weathered like old leather, marked by scars that told stories nobody dared ask about. Dark hair streaked with premature gray hung past his shoulders, and his eyes, God Almighty, those eyes were the color of winter ice, pale blue and utterly without warmth. "Maddox," someone whispered. And the name passed through the crowd like a curse. Everyone knew about Gideon Maddox. He lived alone up on Thunder Ridge in a cabin so remote that even the bravest hunters wouldn't venture near it. Some said he'd killed a man with his bare hands down in Texas. Others claimed he was wanted in 3 territories. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing: Gideon Maddox was dangerous. $20? Jed's voice cracked slightly, but greed overcame fear. "That's all." Gideon stepped forward, his boots making no sound on the wooden sidewalk despite his size. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. When he stopped, he was close enough that Lila could smell wood smoke and pine on his clothes. $20 in supplies, Gideon clarified, his voice low and rough as gravel. "And this." He unslung a rifle from his shoulder, a Winchester 1873, its stock polished to a dark shine, its barrel gleaming with careful maintenance. Jed's eyes lit up with avarice. That rifle was worth 3 months' wages at least. "Now we're talking business." "Pa, no." Lila found her voice terror overcoming her learned silence. "You can't. Please, I'll try harder. Shut your mouth." Jed raised his hand again, but before he could strike, Gideon's massive fist closed around his wrist. "The girl comes with me unharmed," Gideon said quietly. "That's part of the deal." For a moment, father and stranger stood frozen, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then Jed yanked his hand free, rubbing his wrist. "Fine. She's yours to discipline as you see fit once the deal's done." "No." Miss Josie stepped forward. "This is slavery, plain and simple. It's 1885, not 1785. You can't sell a human being." "I'm her father," Jed shot back. "She's my property until she marries or I say otherwise. Law's on my side, Josephine." Sheriff McKenna cleared his throat uncomfortably. "He's technically correct, Miss Josie. A father has rights over his unmarried daughter." "Rights?" Miss Josie's voice was sharp with disgust. "What about human decency?" "Decency don't put food on the table," Jed replied. He looked back at Gideon. "We have a deal." Gideon studied Lila for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to run. His eyes were indeed cold, but there was something else there, something she couldn't quite name. Not cruelty exactly, more like assessment. "We have a deal," Gideon said finally. What happened next moved so quickly that Lila barely had time to process it. Jed shoved her toward Gideon, who caught her arm gently, she noticed with surprise. Money changed hands. Murphy from the general store was summoned to gather $20 worth of flour, salt coffee, and ammunition. The rifle was handed over, Jed cradling it like a beloved child with more tenderness than he'd ever shown his daughter. "She's got a few dresses in a bag at the house," Jed said, already admiring his new weapon. "I'll have someone bring it by Murphy's. You can collect it later." "Wait," Lila gasped. "My sketches, You don't own nothing." Jed cut her off. "Never did. It was all mine, and now it's his." He looked at Gideon. "Good luck with her. You'll need it." And just like that, it was done. Lila had been sold like a horse or a plot of land in front of the entire town in broad daylight. The crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads, others whispering behind raised hands. Nobody intervened. Nobody protested beyond Miss Josie's initial objection. "Come." Gideon set his hand still on her arm. Not gripping, she realized, just guiding. "Where?" Lila's voice was hollow. "Home," he replied, and the words sounded strange in his rough voice. "We've got a long ride ahead." He led her to where 2 horses waited, a massive black stallion that suited him perfectly, and a smaller brown mare with gentle eyes. Without asking, he lifted her onto the mare's saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. For a man who'd just bought her like property, his hands were surprisingly careful. "Can you ride?" he asked. "A little." It was a lie. She'd never been on a horse in her life, but she'd rather fall and break her neck than admit another failing. He studied her for a moment, then adjusted the stirrups. "Hold the saddle horn. Let the mare follow Storm here." He swung up onto the black stallion with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. "We'll go slow." As they began to move, Lila caught sight of Miss Josie standing on the sidewalk, her face drawn with worry. The older woman raised her hand slightly, not quite a wave, more like a blessing or a promise. Then the horses turned the corner and Red Hollow began to fall away behind them. "Why?" Lila asked after they'd passed the last building. "Why did you buy me?" Gideon didn't answer for so long she thought he wouldn't. Then, just as they reached the tree line where the mountain trail began, he said, "Sometimes a person needs saving. Sometimes the only way to save them is to play by the devil's rules." "I don't understand." "You will." They rode in silence after that, climbing steadily into the mountains. The trail was narrow and rocky, bordered by towering pines that blocked out much of the sky. Lila clung to the saddle horn, her thighs already aching from the unfamiliar position, her mind spinning with terror and confusion. What did he mean, saving? What could a man like Gideon Maddox know about salvation? The stories she'd heard painted him as a killer, a hermit who'd retreated to the mountains to escape the law, or worse. And now she belonged to him legally and completely. He could do anything he wanted to her, and no one would stop him. No one would even know. The mare stumbled slightly on a loose rock, and Lila gasped, certain she was about to fall. But Gideon's hand shot out, steadying the mare's bridle until she found her footing again. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. "Cherry here is sure-footed. Trust her." Trust. The word felt foreign in Lila's mouth, like speaking a language she'd never learned. Trust the horse. Trust the man who'd bought her. Trust that somehow, impossibly, this might not end in disaster. They climbed for hours. The town disappeared entirely, swallowed by the wilderness. The only sounds were the horses' hooves on stone, the wind through pine needles, and occasionally the cry of a hawk overhead. Despite her fear, Lila found herself noticing things, the way the light filtered through the canopy, painting everything gold and green, the smell of pine sap and earth, a deer that watched them pass, its dark eyes curious but unafraid. "Beautiful," she murmured without thinking. Gideon glanced back at her. "You like the mountains?" "I've never really seen them, not like this. Pa never let me go far from town." "Why?" The question was simple, but Lila didn't know how to answer. Because he was ashamed of her. Because he was afraid she'd run. Because keeping her close meant he always had someone to blame for his failures. "I don't know," she said finally. Gideon made a sound that might have been acknowledgement or disgust, she couldn't tell which. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western peaks when they finally stopped. They'd climbed so high that Lila could see for miles when the trees thinned valleys and ridges stretching out like a giant's rumpled blanket, painted purple and gold in the late afternoon light. "We'll rest here," Gideon announced, dismounting near a small stream. "Let the horses drink." He helped her down and Lila's legs nearly buckled. She'd been in the saddle for hours and every muscle screamed in protest. Gideon steadied her with one hand, then let go as soon as she found her balance. "Sit, Ubba," he said, gesturing to a fallen log. "I'll tend the horses." Lila sat grateful for the solid ground beneath her. She watched as Gideon led both horses to the stream, speaking to them in a low voice she couldn't quite hear. His hands were gentle as he checked their hooves and adjusted their saddles. Whatever else he was, he clearly cared for his animals. He returned with a canteen and something wrapped in cloth. "Drink," he ordered, handing her the water. "And eat this." The bundle contained bread and dried meat. Simple fare, but Lila's stomach growled embarrassingly loud at the sight. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Pa had been too drunk to remember supper, and she'd burned the cornbread at breakfast, earning a slap and no food. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking a small bite. Gideon sat on a rock across from her, not eating, just watching the mountains. Up close, she could see more details, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, the calluses on his massive hands, the way his eyes never stopped moving, always alert for danger. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He turned those pale eyes on her. "No." "But you bought me. You own me now." "According to your father and the law, yes." "Then what do you want from me?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need help with the homestead. Cooking, cleaning, tending the animals. Winter's coming and there's work that needs doing. That's all." That's all. Lila wanted to believe him, but 16 years of broken promises had taught her better. "And if I can't do the work, if I'm as useless as Pa says, then you'll learn." He stood, apparently done with the conversation. "We need to keep moving. Still got 2 hours of daylight, and I want to make it home before dark." Home. That word again. As if the place they were going could ever be home to her. They mounted up again, Lila's protesting muscles screaming at the renewed torture. But she didn't complain. Complaints only brought punishment, and she didn't yet know what form Gideon's punishments would take. The trail grew steeper and narrower as they climbed. Sometimes Lila could see nothing but a sheer drop on one side, and she closed her eyes, trusting Cherry to know the way. The mare never faltered, following Storm's lead with steady determination. "Almost there," Gideon said as the sun touched the peaks, setting them ablaze. They rounded a massive boulder, and suddenly the trail opened into a clearing. Lila's breath caught in her throat. The cabin sat in a meadow surrounded by towering pines with a view that stretched for 50 miles. It was bigger than she'd expected, real logs, not rough planks with a stone chimney that spoke of permanence. A barn stood to one side, and she could see a garden plot now dormant for winter. Smoke rose from the chimney, which seemed odd since Gideon had been in town all day. "You have someone else here?" she asked, new fear rising. "No, just Running Elk. He tends things when I'm away." As if summoned by his name, a man emerged from the cabin. He was clearly native Ute Lila guessed, with long gray hair and a face mapped with wrinkles. He raised a hand in greeting, but didn't smile. "This the girl?" Running Elk asked when they dismounted. "This is Lila," Gideon confirmed. "Lila, this is Running Elk. He's a friend." The old man studied her with dark, knowing eyes. "Jed Boone's daughter." "Not anymore," Gideon said flatly. Running Elk nodded slowly. "I've made stew. Figured you'd both be hungry." He looked at Lila again. "Girl looks half starved." "Pa said I eat too much, Mom," Lila said automatically. Then wished she hadn't. "Your pa is a fool," Running Elk replied matter-of-factly. "Come. Food first, then you can settle in." The cabin's interior was nothing like Lila had expected. She'd imagined dirt floors and crude furniture the lair of a dangerous man. Instead, she found wooden floors worn smooth with age, a large stone fireplace that radiated warmth, and furniture that, while simple, was well-made and clean. Books. Actual books lined one wall. A rifle rack held several weapons, all meticulously maintained. Everything had its place, ordered and precise. "Sit," Gideon directed, pulling out a chair at the wooden table. Running Elk ladled stew into bowls thick with meat and vegetables smelling of herbs Lila couldn't identify. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but she waited, unsure of the rules in this new place. "Eat," Gideon said, sitting across from her. "No ceremonies here." Lila took a spoonful and nearly moaned. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months, maybe years. Rich and savory, with tender meat that fell apart on her tongue. She tried to eat slowly, mindful of manners, but hunger won. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Running Elk asked, refilling her bowl without asking. Lila tried to remember. 2 days ago, I think. Maybe 3. The two men exchanged glances. "Your father," Running Elk said carefully, "he treated you poorly. He treated me as he saw fit." Lila replied, the practiced response automatic. "That's not what I asked." Lila looked up from her bowl, meeting the old man's eyes. There was no judgment there, just patient waiting. "Yes," she whispered. "He treated me poorly." Running Elk nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already known. Well, you're here now. Things will be different. After dinner, Gideon showed her to a small room at the back of the cabin. It had a real bed with a straw mattress, a wash basin, and even a small window that looked out toward the peaks. Clean clothes were folded on the bed, simple dresses, but they looked like they might actually fit. "This is yours," Gideon said. "There's a bar for the door from the inside if you want it." Lila stared at him. "You're giving me a lock against you. Your room, your choice." He turned to leave, then paused. "Breakfast is at dawn. I'll teach you what needs doing around here. We'll start with the animals. Mr. Maddox." He stopped but didn't turn. "Just Gideon." "Why did you really buy me?" This time he did turn, and in the lamplight his scarred face looked almost gentle. "Your mother was Mary Sullivan before she married your father." Lila's heart stopped. "You knew my mother. She was kind to me once long ago, before you were born, before she died." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I owed her a debt. Today I began to repay it." Before Lila could ask more, he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him. She heard his footsteps move away, heard him speaking quietly to running elk, then heard the front door open and close. Alone for the first time all day, Lila sank onto the bed. It was softer than anything she'd ever slept on. The clothes were clean and looked warm. There was even a thick blanket folded at the foot of the bed. She should have been terrified. She'd been sold to a man everyone feared, dragged into the wilderness and installed in his remote cabin. But instead, for the first time in years, she felt something else entirely. Safe. The word seemed impossible, but there it was. Gideon had bought her, yes, but he'd also given her a room with a lock, fed her, spoken to her like she was a person, not a burden. And he'd known her mother owed her a debt. What kind of debt? What had her gentle mother done for this dangerous man? Outside, she heard the sound of an axe hitting wood. Gideon chopping firewood for the morning, probably. Such a normal domestic sound from a man who was anything but normal. Lila rose and went to the window. The last light was fading from the peaks, painting them purple and silver. Stars were beginning to appear, more stars than she'd ever seen in town. The vastness of it all should have made her feel small, insignificant. Instead, it made her feel like she was part of something larger, something that didn't care about her father's opinions or the town's whispers. A knock at the door made her jump. "Girl," it was Running Elk's voice, "brought you some things." She opened the door to find the old man holding a bundle. "Extra blankets," he explained. "Gets cold up here at night. And this." He handed her something wrapped in leather. Lila unwrapped it carefully and gasped. It was a journal, leather-bound and filled with clean, empty pages. Tucked inside were several pencils. "Gideon said you like to draw," Running Elk explained. "Figured you might want to keep at it." "How did he know?" "Miss Josie told him when he was in town last month. Said you had talent, but your father wouldn't let you pursue it." "Last month?" Lila's mind raced. "But that means he's been planning this." Running Elk confirmed, waiting for the right moment. "Your father finally gave him the opening today, making the offer public like that." "I don't understand. Why would he plan to buy me?" Running Elk's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "That's a story for Gideon to tell when he's ready. But know this, girl, you're safe here. Whatever you've been told about him, whatever the town believes, Gideon Maddox is a man of honor. Rough, yes. Dangerous when needed. But he doesn't hurt innocents, and he keeps his word. The stories about him, some are true," Running Elk admitted. "Some aren't. But none of them are your concern. Your concern is learning to live free." "Free?" "He bought me." "He bought your father's claim to you," Running Elk corrected. "What you do with your freedom is up to you." After he left, Lila sat on the bed with the journal in her lap, running her fingers over the smooth leather. Freedom. The word felt as foreign as trust, but twice as precious. She opened the journal to the first page and picked up a pencil. For a moment she just held it, feeling its familiar weight. Then slowly she began to sketch. Not the wildflowers she usually drew in secret, but the view from her window, mountains and stars and endless sky. Outside, the sound of chopping wood continued rhythmic and steady. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, answered by another. The fire crackled in the main room, and she could hear the low murmur of male voices, Gideon and Running Elk, talking quietly. For 16 years, night had meant fear. Her father's drunken rages, his heavy footsteps outside her door, his voice telling her all the ways she'd failed him that day. But here in this cabin that shouldn't feel safe but did night meant something else. It meant peace. Lila drew until her eyes grew heavy and her fingers cramped. Then she carefully set the journal aside, changed into one of the clean nightgowns that had been left for her and slipped under the blankets. They smelled of pine and soap, clean and comforting. Through the window, stars wheeled overhead, infinite and bright. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She'd have to learn to cook on a stove she didn't know, tend animals she'd never handled, navigate the expectations of a man she didn't understand. But tonight, for the first time, she could remember she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Gideon's voice through the wall, low and rumbling, saying something to Running Elk about preparing the root cellar for winter storage. Such a mundane concern for a man who'd bought a girl that morning. But then nothing about this day had been what she'd expected. In the morning, she would begin to understand that Gideon Maddox was not the monster the town believed him to be. She would learn that salvation sometimes came in unexpected forms, wearing the face of a scarred mountain man who spoke little but saw everything. She would discover that her mother's kindness offered years ago to a desperate young man had created a debt that would ultimately save her daughter from a father's cruelty. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Lila Boone, who was no longer Jed Boone's daughter, but didn't yet know who she would become, slept peacefully in a locked room in a cabin on a mountain, while outside her window the stars kept their ancient watch, and somewhere in the darkness, a man who had bought her freedom stood guard against the ghosts of both their pasts. The sound of a hawk's cry woke her briefly in the deepest part of night. Through sleep-heavy eyes, she saw a large silhouette pass by her window, Gideon checking the perimeter as he apparently did every night. The sight should have frightened her. Instead, she pulled the blankets higher and drifted back to sleep, feeling protected for the first time in memory. Miles below in Red Hollow, Jed Boone polished his new rifle and told himself he'd gotten the better end of the bargain. Let Maddox deal with the useless girl. He had what he wanted, a fine weapon, and his freedom from the burden of an unwanted daughter. He would learn too late that he had sold away the only person who might have mourned his eventual passing. But that reckoning would come later when the consequences of this day rippled outward like stones thrown in still water. For now, in a cabin high in the Colorado mountains, a young woman slept safely, while a damaged man kept watch, both of them beginning to understand that sometimes rescue comes disguised as captivity, and freedom can be found in the most unexpected chains. Dawn came early to the mountains, painting the peaks rose gold, while the valleys still drowsed in purple shadow. Lila woke to the sound of movement in the main room, the quiet clink of metal against metal that meant someone was tending the fire. For a moment, panic seized her chest as memory crashed back she'd been sold. She was in a stranger's cabin. She belonged to Gideon Maddox now. But then she remembered the locked door, the clean closed the journal with its promise of empty pages waiting to be filled. She dressed quickly in one of the simple dresses that had been left for her, surprised to find it fit almost perfectly. The fabric was sturdy but soft, practical for mountain living. As she braided her dark hair, she heard voices through the wall, Gideon's low rumble and Running Elk's quieter responses. When she finally gathered courage to emerge from her room, she found both men at the table, coffee steaming between them. Gideon looked up, those pale eyes assessing her with the same careful attention he'd shown yesterday. "Morning," he said simply. "Coffee. Yes. Please." Running Elk poured her a cup while Gideon pushed a plate toward her, biscuits and gravy with eggs fried perfectly. Her stomach growled audibly, and she flushed with embarrassment. "Eat," Gideon commanded. "Long day ahead." As she ate, trying not to wolf down the food like a starving animal, Running Elk spoke. "I'll be heading back to my place today. Winter preparations to finish." "You don't live here?" Lila asked, then worried she'd overstepped. "Got my own cabin about 3 miles north," the old man explained. "But I help out here when needed. Been doing so for 8 years now, ever since this one." He nodded at Gideon. "Decided to stop running and plant roots." Gideon shot him a warning look, but Running Elk just smiled serenely and continued drinking his coffee. After breakfast, Running Elk took his leave, pressing a small leather pouch into Lila's hands before he left. "Herbs," he explained. "For tea. Helps with the altitude adjustment. You're higher up than you're used to." When he was gone, Gideon stood. "Come. Time to show you the place." The tour was practical and thorough. The barn first, where 2 milk cows stood placidly in their stalls, along with several goats and a pen of chickens. "Cows need milking twice daily," Gideon explained. "Dawn and dusk. Goats once. Chickens need feeding and egg collecting." "I've never milked a cow," Lila admitted, bracing for anger. Instead, Gideon simply said, "Then you'll learn. Tomorrow morning, I'll show you." The root cellar came next, carved into the hillside and lined with stones. Shelves held preserves, smoked meat, sacks of flour, and cornmeal, dried beans, and other supplies. "Everything we need for winter," Gideon explained. "Town's too far once the heavy snows come. We prepare or we starve." The word slipped out before she could stop it. He confirmed. "You live here now. Your survival depends on this place functioning same as mine." There was a smokehouse, a woodshed already half filled with split logs, and the garden plot he'd mentioned. "Come spring, you'll help with planting," he said. "Your mother had a way with growing things. Maybe you inherited it." Every mention of her mother made Lila's chest tight with questions, but Gideon's closed expression discouraged asking them. Not yet, she sensed, not until he was ready. The day passed in a blur of learning. How to check the chickens for eggs without getting pecked. How to scatter feed so all the birds got their share. How to tell when the goats were being stubborn versus when something was actually wrong. Gideon was patient but exacting, making her repeat tasks until she got them right. "Why does it matter if I scatter the feed in a pattern?" she asked after the 3rd demonstration. "Because the weaker birds need to eat too. You scatter it right, everyone gets fed. Do it wrong, and the strong ones take everything while the weak ones starve." He paused, then added quietly, "Too much of that in the world already." By afternoon, her arms ached from carrying water buckets, and her back protested from bending to collect eggs. But there was something satisfying about the work. It had purpose-clear results. Fed animals were content animals. Fresh eggs meant breakfast. Clean water meant health. Everything connected to survival in a way that made sense. "You're doing well," Gideon said, as they returned to the cabin for the midday meal. Lila nearly dropped the egg basket. Expected you to complain more. Town girls usually do." "I'm not exactly a precious flower," Lila said, then immediately regretted the bitter tone. "No," Gideon agreed, studying her. "Your father made sure of that, didn't he?" She didn't answer, focusing instead on preparing their simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apples. Gideon didn't push, just ate in silence while scratching notes in a ledger. That afternoon brought a surprise visitor. Lila was learning to card wool from the goats when she heard horses approaching. Gideon emerged from the barn, immediately rifle in hand, but held casually, not quite threatening. Miss Josie rounded the bend, her medical bag strapped to her saddle, her gray hair pinned severely despite the mountain wind. "Put that down, Gideon Maddox. You know perfectly well I'm no threat." "Habit," Gideon replied, but he set the rifle aside. "What brings you up here?" "Checking on my newest patient," Miss Josie said briskly, dismounting with surprising agility for a woman her age. Her eyes found Lila immediately, taking in everything from her properly fitting dress to the color in her cheeks. "Well, you look better already. Come here, child." Lila obeyed, submitting to Miss Josie's examination, checking her eyes, her throat, feeling her arms for muscle tone. "When did you last have your monthly bleeding?" Miss Josie asked bluntly, ignoring Lila's mortified gasp and Gideon's sudden fascination with the barn roof. 2 months ago," Lila admitted quietly. "Sometimes it stops when there isn't enough food." Miss Josie's mouth tightened. "That bastard was starving you. Gideon, this girl needs proper nutrition. Meat, daily vegetables, dairy. Her body's been in survival mode too long." "She'll have whatever she needs," Gideon said firmly. "See that she does." Miss Josie pulled a bottle from her bag. "Iron tonic, 1 spoonful daily until your courses return to normal. And these," she added, producing a paper packet, "are seeds. Medicinal herbs. Plant them. Come spring, I'll teach you what to do with them." "Why are you helping me?" Lila asked. Miss Josie's stern expression softened. "Because your mother was my friend, and I failed to protect you from your father while she lived. This is the least I can do now." She glanced at Gideon. "Besides, someone needs to make sure this mountain hermit doesn't accidentally kill you with his cooking." "My cooking's fine," Gideon protested mildly. "You've been living on beans and game meat for 8 years. That's not fine. That's survival." Miss Josie turned back to Lila. "You know how to cook?" "Some. Pa didn't like anything fancy, but I can manage basics." "I'll teach you more. These men need proper feeding if they're going to keep this place running through winter." She mounted her horse again. "I'll be back in a week. Try not to let him work you to death before then." After she left, Gideon stood staring at the trail for a long moment. "She means well," he said finally. "She seems to care about you some," Lila observed carefully. "She tolerates me. There's a difference." He turned back toward the barn. "Come, time you learn to milk those cows." Milking was harder than it looked. The cow, a placid brown creature named Buttercup, despite Gideon's embarrassment at the name, stood patiently while Lila fumbled with the proper hand position. "Squeeze and pull," Gideon instructed, demonstrating on the other side. "Rhythm matters. Like this." It took multiple attempts before Lila managed a thin stream of milk. "I'm wasting time," she said, frustrated. "You're learning. Different thing entirely." His large hands covered hers, adjusting her grip. "Here, feel the rhythm." The contact should have frightened her. Those hands could crush her without effort. Instead, their careful guidance reminded her of how he'd steadied the mare yesterday, how he handled the animals with such gentleness despite his strength. By the time they finished both cows, her forearms burned and her hands cramped, but there were 2 full pails of milk. "You'll build the muscles," Gideon assured her. "Gets easier." That evening, as she helped prepare dinner, venison stew from meat Gideon had smoked last week, she found herself relaxing incrementally. The cabin felt less like a prison and more like what it actually was, a working homestead that happened to be isolated. "Can I ask you something?" she ventured as they ate. Gideon nodded, wary. "Running Elk said you stopped running 8 years ago. Running from what?" His jaw tightened. "The past." "Your past or someone else's both." He set down his spoon. "Some stories aren't mine to tell. Others I'm not ready to tell. But know this, I've done things I'm not proud of. Killed men who needed killing and some who maybe didn't. The law might still want me in Texas, maybe New Mexico too. But I've never hurt a woman or a child, never stolen from anyone who couldn't afford the loss, and never broken my word once given. That's all you need to know for now." It was more than she'd expected him to share. "Thank you for telling me." He studied her in that intense way he had, like he was reading words written under her skin. "You're not afraid." "Should I be?" "Most would be." Lila considered this. "Pa taught me to be afraid of everything. My shadow, my voice, my appetite, my very existence. But you—" She paused, searching for words. "You're dangerous, yes. But not to me. I don't know how I know that, but I do." Something shifted in his expression, too quick to identify. "Your mother said something similar once. Will you tell me about her? How you knew her?" "Someday." He stood clearly, ending the conversation. "There's mending needs doing. Can you sew?" She could one of the few skills Pa had insisted on because it saved money. They spent the evening by the fire, Lila darning socks while Gideon oiled leather tack. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the pop of burning logs and the wind singing through the pines outside. When she finally retired to her room, Lila felt the peculiar exhaustion that came from honest work. Her body ached, but it was different from the ache of hunger or fear. This was the ache of muscles used and useful of labor that produced tangible results. She opened her journal and began to sketch, not the mountains this time, but Buttercup's patient face, the particular way Gideon held his coffee cup, Miss Josie's stern kindness. The pencil moved across paper with increasing confidence, capturing moments from this strange new life. A knock interrupted her. "Lila, come in." Gideon entered carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. This was in the things from your father's house. Thought you might want it. She unwrapped it carefully and gasped. It was her mother's Bible, the one thing of value Pa hadn't sold for drink. Inside the front cover, her mother's careful handwriting listed family births and deaths. Pressed between pages were dried wildflowers still holding faint color. "He didn't know I had it," Lila whispered. "I hid it under the floor. Miss Josie found it, figured it was yours." Tears burned her eyes. "Thank you." Gideon shifted uncomfortably. "Keep it safe. Books matter up here. Long winters, longer nights. Reading helps." After he left, Lila held the Bible to her chest, breathing in the faint scent of her mother's lavender sachet that still clung to the pages. She opened it randomly and found a passage her mother had underlined. "She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." Lila had never felt strong or dignified, had never been able to laugh at any day, let alone those to come. But sitting in this mountain cabin with honest work behind her and strange protection around her, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she might learn. The next days fell into a rhythm. Dawn meant milking, then breakfast, then the endless cycle of homestead maintenance. Gideon taught her to split kindling, though he handled the main wood splitting himself to identify animal illness to preserve meat with salt and smoke. He was patient with mistakes, quick to demonstrate proper technique, sparse with praise, but generous with instruction. "Why does it matter if the wood stacked bark up?" she asked one afternoon, rebuilding a pile she'd done wrong. "Bark up sheds rain, bark down holds moisture, rots the wood. Wet wood means no fire. No fire in winter means death." He helped her reposition a heavy log. "Everything up here has a reason. Nothing's arbitrary." She began to understand the deeper truth in that. The cabin's position caught morning sun but was shielded from northern winds. The garden plot's location got maximum light while natural rocks provided wind protection. Even the furniture arrangement maximized heat from the fireplace while maintaining clear paths in case of emergency evacuation. "You've thought of everything," she said one evening. "Had 8 years to learn from mistakes," Gideon replied. "First winter nearly killed me. Second wasn't much better. Running elk taught me what I didn't know, and experience taught the rest." "Why did you choose here, these specific mountains?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "It chose me. I was heading nowhere, just away. Horse went lame near here. While I waited for him to heal, I found peace I hadn't known existed. Decided to stop running, see if I could build something instead of destroying. And have you built something?" He gestured around the cabin. "Built this." "I meant..." "Never mind." "You meant have I built something in myself, fixed what was broken?" He met her eyes. "Work in progress." That night, Lila woke to the sound of distress. Not danger she'd learned to recognize Gideon's normal patrol sounds, but something else. She crept from her room to find him sitting by the dying firehead in his hands, shoulders shaking silently. She should have retreated, given him privacy. Instead, she quietly added wood to the fire, then made tea with running elk's herbs. She set a cup near his elbow and sat in the other chair, not speaking, just present. After a long while, he said roughly, "You should be asleep." "So should you." "I don't sleep well, never have not since..." He stopped. "Since whatever sent you running, since I was 15 and watched my family burn." The words came out flat, emotionless, but his hands trembled around the teacup. "Comancheros. Wanted our horses. We didn't have enough to satisfy them, so they took everything else. Parents, sister. Would have taken me too, but I was in town. Came back to ashes and bones." Lila's heart clenched. "How did you survive badly? Became someone else, someone who couldn't be hurt because he felt nothing. Worked for bad men doing bad things, got good at violence." He stared into the fire. "Your mother saw through all that somehow, saw something worth saving." "When did you meet her?" 15 years ago. I was 23, running from a job gone wrong. Wounded, dying probably. Collapsed near your father's ranch before you were born, before he moved to town. Your mother found me in the barn. Should have turned me in for the bounty. Instead, she hid me, nursed me back to health, fed me from her own stores, risked everything if your father had found out." "That sounds like her," Lila said softly. She talked to me while I healed, about books about her garden, about the child she hoped to have someday. Reminded me that the world held more than violence and survival. When I was well enough to leave, she gave me supplies and told me to find something worth living for, not just worth dying for. Did you? He gestured around the cabin again. Tried to. Then I heard she'd died. Heard how your father treated you. Took me time to figure out how to help without making things worse. Then he gave me the opening. By offering to sell me. By showing the whole town his true nature. No one can claim I stole you or kidnapped you. They all witnessed the transaction. You're legally mine, which means you're legally free of him. Lila absorbed this understanding dawning. You planned this for years. Your mother saved my life. Least I could do was save her daughters. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire. Finally, Lila asked, the nightmares, do they ever stop? Sometimes. Gets easier when you're not alone. He glanced at her. Why aren't you afraid of me, really? Because you're broken too, she said simply. Just differently than I am. Broken things recognize each other. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Your mother would be proud of who you're becoming. I'm not becoming anything. I'm just surviving. No. His voice was firm. You're doing more than that. You're learning, growing, getting stronger every day. You're finding out who you are when someone's not forcing you to be nothing. Before she could respond, a sound outside made him stiffen. In one fluid motion, he was up, rifle in hand. Stay here. But the voice that called out was familiar. Gideon, it's Running Elk. Need help. Gideon threw open the door. Running Elk stood supporting a young man who was barely conscious, blood seeping through makeshift bandages. Found him on the trail, Running Elk explained as they carried him inside. Shot. Looks like he ran afoul of the garrison gang. Lila recognized the injured man Tom Bennett from town. He'd been one of the few who'd ever shown her kindness, sometimes leaving fresh bread on their doorstep when Pa was on a bender. Lila. Tom's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. You're alive? Of course I'm alive, she said, helping to ease him onto the table. Why wouldn't I be? Your pa said Maddox said you'd be dead in a week. My father says a lot of things, Lila replied curtly. Most of them lies. Gideon was already examining the wound. Bullet's still in there. Need to get it out. I'll get Miss Josie, Running Elk said. No time. He's losing too much blood. Gideon looked at Lila. I need your help. Can you handle it? She swallowed hard, but nodded. Tell me what to do. What followed was the longest hour of her life. Following Gideon's terse instructions, she boiled water, prepared bandages, held Tom still while Gideon extracted the bullet with tools sterilized in flame. Tom screamed once, then passed out, which Gideon said was a mercy. There, Gideon said, finally holding up the bloody bullet. Clean wound, no organ damage. He'll live if infection doesn't set in. They cleaned and bandaged the wound properly, then moved Tom to the small room that served as storage, hastily converted to a sick room. Lila sat with him, cooling his fever with damp cloths, while Gideon and Running Elk spoke quietly in the main room. Garrison gang's getting bolder, she heard Running Elk say. This is the third shooting this month. Sheriff won't do anything, Gideon replied. He's in their pocket. Then maybe someone else should. Not my fight anymore. It is if they come here, and they will eventually. These mountains are too good a hideout to ignore forever. Tom stirred, mumbling incoherently. Lila gave him water, supporting his head. His eyes opened clearer now. Lila, this is Maddox's place. Yes. But everyone says a lot of things, few of them true. She adjusted his blanket. Rest now. You're safe. Safe, Tom repeated wonderingly. In Gideon Maddox's cabin. Ma won't believe it. Then maybe don't tell her yet, Lila suggested practically. Tom managed a weak smile. You've changed. You seem stronger. I'm the same person. No, Tom said with surprising clarity. You're not. Your father tried to break you, but here, you're becoming who you were meant to be. Over the next 3 days, while Tom recovered, the cabin became a different kind of classroom. Miss Josie arrived to check on the patient, bringing medical supplies, and staying to teach Lila basic healing skills. "Every woman should know how to treat wounds," she said briskly, "especially living this far from help." Tom's presence also revealed another side of Gideon. He was unexpectedly gentle with the injured man, changing bandages with careful hands, preparing easy-to-digest broths, even reading to Tom from one of his books when the younger man grew restless. "You're not what people think," Tom said one evening as Gideon helped him sit up. "People think what they need to think," Gideon replied. "Why let them think the worst? Easier. Man with a bad reputation gets left alone. Man with a good one gets expectations." But Tom's presence also brought disturbing news from town. "Your father's been drinking heavy since you left," he told Lila, "telling anyone who'll listen that Maddox stole you, that he's probably killed you by now. He's trying to work up a mob to come get you." "Let him try," Gideon said flatly. "He's got the sheriff's ear," Tom warned, "and Sheriff McKenna needs a distraction from the Garrison gang problem. Might decide rescuing Lila is just the ticket." "I don't need rescuing," Lila said firmly. "We know that, but the town doesn't. All they know is what Jed tells them, and he's painting quite a picture. Says Maddox is holding you prisoner doing unspeakable things." Lila's cheeks burned with anger. "While he was the one who sold me, facts don't matter when people want to believe the worst," Running Elk observed from his corner. That night after Tom was asleep, Gideon stood on the porch scanning the darkness. Lila joined him, pulling a shawl tight against the mountain cold. "You're worried," she observed. "Cautious. There's a difference. If they come, they won't find you. I promise that." "I don't want to hide. I'm not ashamed of being here." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "No, you're not. Are you stronger than you know Lila Boone?" "Not Boone," she said suddenly. "I don't want his name anymore." "Then what?" She thought of her mother of the Bible with its pressed flowers of the strength she was finding in these mountains. "Just Lila, until I earn a new name." "Names can be earned. Everything worthwhile has to be earned. You taught me that." A ghost of a smile touched his scarred face. "Did I?" "Every day. With every task that has a reason, every skill that ensures survival. You're teaching me to earn my place in the world. You shouldn't have to earn basic human dignity. But I do. That's the world we live in. So I'll earn it and then some. I'll become so strong, so capable, that no one can ever sell me again." "Lila," he stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "You're already—" A shot rang out, shattering the night's peace. Then another. Not close, but not far enough either. "Inside," Gideon commanded, already moving. "Wake Running Elk. Check on Tom." "What are you going to do?" "What I have to." He was already loading weapons movements, efficient and practiced. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Running Elk." "Gideon, go." She went heart-pounding. Running Elk was already awake, his own rifle ready. Tom was struggling to sit up. "What's happening?" Tom asked. "Trouble?" Running Elk said simply. "Boy, can you shoot?" "Not well with this shoulder." "Then you'll reload. Lila, you know how to handle a gun." "No." "Time to learn." He handed her a revolver. "Point, squeeze, don't pull, and only shoot if someone tries to come through that door who isn't us." They waited in tense silence. More shots echoed through the mountains, getting closer, then voices rough and drunk. "That's not a rescue party," Tom said grimly. "That's the Garrison gang." "Or your father with hired guns," and Running Elk suggested. "Does it matter?" Lila asked. "No. Either way, they're not here for anything good." The shooting stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Lila found herself straining to hear any sound, any indication of what was happening. Was Gideon all right? Was he out there alone against multiple attackers? Then, clear as a bell, a voice called out, "Maddox, we know you got the girl. Send her out and we'll leave peaceful-like." That wasn't her father's voice. Lila didn't recognize it. "Who are you?" Running Elk called back. "Name's Garrison. Heard there was a pretty little thing up here needs rescuing. Figured we'd be heroes, take her back to town. After we have some fun, of course." Tom cursed under his breath. They're not here for rescue. They're here for... I know what they're here for, Lila said quietly. Her hands were steady on the revolver. They're here because they think I'm helpless. Property to be taken. 5 of us out here, Garrison continued. 1 of you in there, if we counted right. Old man, wounded boy, and a girl. Not good odds. You counted wrong. Gideon's voice came from somewhere entirely different than expected. How had he circled around so silently? A shot. A scream. Then Garrison's voice, less confident. You shot Marcus. In the shoulder. He'll live if you leave now. Stay and the next one's fatal. You can't take all of us, Try me. Running Elk moved to a window, peering carefully through a crack in the shutters. 3 of them heading for the barn, trying to flank. The hay, Lila said suddenly. There's lantern oil in the barn loft. If they knock it over, the whole barn could go up, Tom finished. The animals. Lila was moving before she thought. Out the back door, keeping low using the shadows Gideon had inadvertently taught her to notice during their morning chores. The barn's back entrance was small, meant for mucking out stalls. She slipped through it. The animals were restless, sensing danger. She moved past them, climbing the ladder to the loft with painful slowness, trying not to make a sound. Below, she could hear the men entering through the main door. Check the stalls. Might be hiding here. Nah, they're all in the cabin. We get behind it, we got 'em pinned. Still worth checking. Might be valuables. The lantern oil was where she remembered 2 large jars on a shelf. Carefully, so carefully, she moved them to a safer spot, tucking them behind bales of hay. Then she heard footsteps on the ladder. Someone's been up here recent, a voice said. Hay's been moved. Lila pressed herself into the darkest corner, hardly breathing. A head appeared through the loft opening, then shoulders. The man climbed up, looking around. She could shoot him. The revolver was in her hand. But she'd never killed anyone, never even hurt anyone. Her finger trembled on the trigger. Then she heard Buttercup's distressed moo and a man's rough laugh. Maybe we take the livestock too. Bonus payment. These men would take everything. The animals she'd learned to tend the barn. Gideon had built the life they were creating here. Anger overrode fear. Hey up, she said. The man in the loft spun toward her. She didn't shoot him. Instead, she kicked the ladder. He windmilled his arms, trying to catch his balance, then fell backward with a crash and a scream. Jake's down, someone yelled. Lila was already moving, swinging down from the loft, using the rope and pulley system for hauling hay. She landed hard, but running bursting from the barn as boots pounded behind her. A shot rang out. Wood splintered near her head, then another shot from a different direction, and the man behind her cursed. Inside! Gideon's voice, commanding and fierce. She ran for the cabin, Running Elk, throwing the door open just enough for her to dive through. More shots exchanged, then gradually sounds of retreat horses' hooves, angry voices fading into distance. They're going, Tom said from his window post. For now, Running Elk amended. Gideon appeared in the doorway, blood on his shirt. Everyone all right? You're hurt, Lila said, moving toward him. Not mine. His eyes found hers, cold with anger. You left the cabin. They were going to burn the barn. You directly disobeyed. I saved the barn and the animals, and probably gave you the distraction you needed. She met his glare steadily. I'm not a child, Gideon. I'm not going to hide while others fight for me. You could have been killed. So could you. They stood facing each other, both breathing hard. Running Elk cleared his throat. Perhaps this argument can wait until we're sure they're not coming back. The tension broke slightly. Gideon turned to Tom. You held up well. Didn't do much but sit here. Sometimes that's what's needed. He looked at Lila again, something shifting in his expression. You did well too. Stupid, but well. I'll take that as a compliment. Don't. Next time you pull something like that, next time I'll be better prepared. You could teach me to shoot properly. Absolutely not. Then I'll teach myself. Less safe that way, but you're impossible. I learned from watching you. Running Elk laughed outright at that. She's got you there. They spent the rest of the night on watch, but the garrison gang didn't return. As dawn broke, Running Elk scouted their trail. Headed back toward town, he reported. One horse carrying double must be the one from the barn. He'll live, but won't be climbing any more ladders soon. They'll be back, Tom said. Men like that don't give up easy. Then we'll be ready, Gideon said. We, Lila asked pointedly. He sighed. Yes, we. Running elk teach her to shoot. Might as well do it right. Lila smiled her first real smile since arriving at the cabin. It transformed her face, and both men noticed. Your mother smiled like that, Gideon said quietly. When she won an argument. Did she win many? All of them. Had a way of making you think it was your idea all along. That afternoon, while Tom rested and Gideon repaired damage from the night's events, Running Elk taught Lila to handle firearms. She was a quick study, her hands steady, her aim improving with each shot. You're a natural, Running Elk observed. Got the patience for it. I've had lots of practice being patient, Lila replied, thinking of 16 years of waiting for something to change. Different kind of patience. This is active waiting, hunter's patience. Is that what Gideon has? Among other things. Running Elk adjusted her stance. He's got survivor's instincts, fighter's skills, and killer's experience, but underneath he's got something else. What? Same thing you do, a need to protect what matters. That evening, as she helped Tom eat his soup, he said, You know they'll twist this in town. Say Maddox is holding you prisoner, that the garrison gang was trying to rescue you. Let them, Lila said. I know the truth. But don't you want others to know that you're safe, happy even? She considered this. The people who matter know. Miss Josie Running Elk, now you. The rest. They'd rather believe the story that confirms what they already think. When did you become so wise? Tuesday, she said dryly, making him laugh, then wince at his shoulder. Tom Bennett left 3 days later, his shoulder healing well enough for the journey down the mountain. Before he departed, he pressed Lila's hand between both of his. I'll tell the truth in town, he promised, to anyone who'll listen. They won't believe you, Lila said gently. A wounded boy's word against my father's performance. He's had years to perfect his role as the long-suffering parent. Then I'll keep telling it until someone does believe. Tom glanced at Gideon, who stood silent by the door. You saved my life, Mr. Maddox. Both of you did. That has to count for something. After Tom's departure, an uneasy quiet settled over the mountain. The first snows came early that year, dusting the peaks white while the valley still clung to autumn gold. Lila threw herself into learning everything she could, not just the daily chores now, but skills Running Elk taught her during his frequent visits. How to track deer through fresh snow. How to identify edible plants from poisonous ones. How to read weather signs in cloud formations and wind patterns. You're trying to become the mountain itself. Gideon observed one evening, finding her practicing knots by firelight, the rope work Running Elk had shown her that afternoon. I'm trying to become someone who can't be sold again, she corrected, not looking up from her work. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. You bought me yourself. What's to stop you from selling me to someone else when you tire of having me here? The silence stretched so long that Lila finally looked up. Gideon's face was carved from stone, but something flickered in those pale eyes, hurt maybe, or disappointment. Is that what you think of me? He asked quietly. I think you're a good man who's trying to help, but I've learned not to depend on anyone's goodness lasting forever. She returned to her knots. Pa was good once before Ma died. Then grief turned to drink, and drink turned to cruelty. People change. Some do, Gideon agreed. Others just reveal who they always were. He moved to his desk, pulling out papers she'd never seen before. These are yours. Lila took the documents, reading by the firelight. Legal papers filed with a lawyer in Denver. They transferred ownership of her person from Gideon Maddox to herself. I don't understand, she whispered. Loophole in the law. A woman can't own herself if her father claims her, but she can if she's been legally emancipated through sale and subsequent release. Had Running Elk's cousin draw these up. He's a lawyer, handles cases for the Ute Nation. Soon as you turn 17, that's next month, isn't it? These become legal. You'll be free. But the town witnessed you buying me. They think, let them think what they want. The law will say different. He returned to his chair. I told you that first day. Sometimes saving someone means playing by the devil's rules first, then changing the game. Lila stared at the papers, tears blurring the formal language. Why didn't you tell me sooner? You weren't ready to hear it. You were too busy learning to be strong. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Can't become unmovable if you're not standing on solid ground first. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching snow fall silent and steady, transforming the familiar landscape into something new. The papers lay on her small table, promise and proof combined. In a month, she would legally own herself. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. A movement caught her eye, a figure approaching through the snow, then another and another. Her blood went cold. Gideon! She ran from her room. Someone's coming. Multiple people. He was already up, already armed. How many? At least 6, maybe more. Wake Running Elk, he's in the loft. But Running Elk was already descending the ladder, his movement silent despite his age. Heard horses 10 minutes ago. Been watching. It's not the Garrison gang. Then who? A voice boomed across the snowy clearing. Gideon Maddox. This is Sheriff McKenna. I'm here with a legal warrant for the return of Lila Boone to her rightful guardian. Pa, Lila breathed. He actually did it. He convinced the sheriff, open up peaceful-like and nobody needs to get hurt. The sheriff continued. Gideon looked at Lila. Your choice. We can fight or we can play this smart. How is surrendering smart? Who said anything about surrendering? He moved to the door. Sheriff, you're welcome to come in and discuss this like civilized men, but only you and Jed. The rest stay outside. Murmured consultation outside, then, agreed. Gideon unbarred the door. Sheriff McKenna entered, snow-dusting his hat and shoulders, followed by Jed Boone. Lila's father looked worse than when she'd last seen him, thinner, more hollow-eyed, his hands shaking slightly with need for drink. There she is, Jed said, voice thick with false emotion. My baby girl, what has this monster done to you? Fed me, clothed me, taught me useful skills, so, Lila replied evenly, everything you never did. Don't speak to your father that way, Sheriff McKenna warned. Mr. Boone here says he was coerced into that transaction, says Maddox threatened him. That's a lie, Running Elk said from his corner. I wasn't there, but Miss Josie was. So was Tom Bennett and about 30 other townspeople, all of whom could have been mistaken about what they saw, the sheriff said smoothly. A father's rights are sacred. The law is clear. Yes, Gideon agreed. The law is very clear. He pulled out more papers from his desk, which is why I filed these with the territorial court last week. Sheriff McKenna took the papers, frowning as he read. His face went pale. This is a fraud charge. Against me. An embezzlement. And conspiracy with known criminals, the Garrison gang specifically. Gideon's voice was calm as winter ice. Interesting what a good lawyer can find when he starts looking into a sheriff's financial records. Those new horses of yours cost more than your annual salary. Where'd the money come from, Sheriff? You can't prove anything. Can I? Tom Bennett gave a sworn statement about being shot by the Garrison gang? About you refusing to investigate? About money changing hands in your office? Gideon pulled out another paper. This is his testimony, notarized and filed. Jed grabbed the sheriff's arm. What's going on? You said... Shut up, McKenna snarled, then turned back to Gideon. What do you want? I want you to read this other document. Gideon handed him the emancipation papers. In 1 month, Lila will be legally free. Any attempt to remove her before then is kidnapping. Any attempt after is also kidnapping. The Denver lawyer who filed these papers has copies. If anything happens to anyone in this cabin, he's instructed to send them to the federal marshal. Federal marshal doesn't have jurisdiction. He does when the sheriff is corrupt. Amazing how interested federal law becomes when local law fails. Gideon stepped closer to McKenna. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to tell everyone that you investigated and found Lila is here of her own free will. And you're going to stay away from this mountain. And if I don't, then those fraud papers get sent tomorrow instead of being held in reserve. McKenna's jaw worked furiously. You're blackmailing a sheriff. I'm protecting an innocent girl from a corrupt lawman and an abusive father. The methods are negotiable. The outcome isn't. Please. Jed suddenly burst out, surprising everyone. She's my daughter, my only family. I need her. You need someone to blame for your failures, Lila said quietly. Someone to hurt when the drink isn't enough to dull whatever pain you're carrying. But I won't be that person anymore. You don't understand. Jed's voice cracked. Your mother's death, it broke something in me. Every time I look at you, I see her, and it hurts so much I can't breathe. For a moment, Lila felt the old sympathy stir. Then she remembered every bruise, every cruel word, every day of hunger and fear. Then you should have let me go years ago, she said. Instead, you kept me close just to have something to break the way you were broken. That's not love, Pa. That's cruelty wearing love's mask. Jed's face crumpled. I sold you. God forgive me, I sold my own daughter. Yes? Lila agreed simply. You did, and it was the first kind thing you've done for me in years, even if you didn't mean it that way. Sheriff McKenna had been silent during this exchange, calculating. Now he said, I need something more than just holding those papers back. If I'm going to sell this story in town, I need a reason people will believe. Tell them the truth, Running Elk suggested. That Lila is apprenticing as a healer with Miss Josie, that she's learning mountain medicine from me, that she's preparing to become a teacher. A teacher? Lila looked at him in surprise. Why not? You can read, write, do figures, more than most in these parts. Mountain families need education for their children, would give you a respectable position, independent income. And it would explain why she's staying here, Gideon added, understanding the strategy. Not a captive, but a young woman preparing for her future profession. McKenna considered this. It might work. Folks respect teachers, and if Miss Josie vouches for it, she will, Gideon said with certainty. I haven't agreed to leave her here, Jed said weakly, but everyone could see the fight had gone out of him. You agreed when you took $20 and a rifle for her, Gideon reminded him. No court in the territory would give you custody back after that. Then I want to visit, see that she's all right. No, Lila said firmly. You had 16 years to care about my well-being. You don't get to start now. Jed looked at her, really looked at her for perhaps the first time in years. You've changed. You're stronger. I'm the same person I always was. You just never bothered to notice. She took a breath. Go home, Pa. Drink yourself to death if that's what you choose, but do it without me as your audience. The cruelty of the words made even Gideon shift uncomfortably, but Lila didn't take them back. Some truths needed their sharp edges to cut properly. Sheriff McKenna stood. We're done here. Jed, we're leaving. But now. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. Unless you want me to arrest you for selling your daughter in the first place. That was illegal, you know. I just chose to overlook it. Jed stumbled toward the door, then turned back one last time. Your mother would be ashamed of you. No, Lila said quietly. She'd be proud that I survived you. After they left, the cabin felt somehow larger, as if their departure had created space for new possibilities. Running Elk built up the fire while Gideon barred the door. Lila stood in the center of the room, trembling slightly now that the confrontation was over. You did well, Gideon said. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Is that from one of your books? No, that's from experience. He paused. The teaching idea. Would that interest you? Lila considered. Maybe. Yes. I think it would, but I don't know enough yet. Winter's long, Running Elk said. Plenty of time for learning. I know the old ways stories and skills that should be passed on. Gideon has his books. Miss Josie has her healing knowledge. Between us all, we could prepare you. You do that, child, Running Elk said gently. You kicked a ladder out from under a man to save Gideon's barn. You stood up to your father and a corrupt sheriff. You think we wouldn't invest in someone with that kind of spirit? That night, as snow continued to fall, they made plans. Lila would study through the winter mathematics from Gideon's surprisingly extensive library. Traditional knowledge from running elk healing arts from Miss Josie. Come spring, she would be ready to offer her services to the mountain families who couldn't send their children to the town school. It won't be easy, Gideon warned. Mountain people are suspicious of outsiders. I'm not an outsider anymore, Lila said. I'm someone who chose the mountains over the town. That has to count for something. The next weeks fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were still for chores, but afternoons became study time. Gideon, it turned out, had been educated back east before his family moved to Texas. He taught her algebra, geometry, even basic Latin. Why Latin? She asked, struggling with conjugations. Discipline. Trains the mind to see patterns. Also, many scientific terms come from Latin. If you're going to teach, you should understand the roots of words. Running Elk's lessons were different, but equally valuable. He taught her the names of plants in 3 languages, English, Ute, and Spanish. Showed her how to read animal signs, predict weather changes, understand the mountain's moods. Everything is connected, he explained. Showing her how deer paths followed water sources, how certain birds appeared before storms. Teach this to the children and they'll never be lost. Miss Josie came weekly, weather permitting, bringing medical texts and practical experience. Most mountain ailments are preventable, she said. Teaching Lila about nutrition, sanitation, basic hygiene. Teach the mothers these things and you'll save more lives than any doctor. But it wasn't all study. The threats from below hadn't disappeared. Twice more riders approached the cabin, but word had apparently spread about the legal papers. They observed from a distance, but came no closer. Gideon remained vigilant, teaching Lila defensive strategies along with her other lessons. Never depend entirely on others for protection, he said, showing her how to set simple alarms around the property. Even when help is near, you need to be able to buy time. One evening in late November, as they worked together repairing harnesses, Lila asked, "Do you ever regret buying me?" Gideon's hand stilled. "Do you regret being bought?" "That's not an answer." "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. This place was too quiet, too much time to think about the past. You've brought life back to it." "Running Elk says I've brought life back to you too." "Running Elk talks too much." "He says you smile now, sometimes, when you think no one's looking." "I've always smiled." "He says not like this." Gideon focused intently on the harness. "You remind me that there's still good in the world, worth protecting, worth fighting for." "Is that why you've started writing in that journal, the one you hide under the loose floorboard?" He looked up sharply. "How did you—" "I cleaned this cabin. I know every board, every corner." She smiled. "I haven't read it. Privacy matters. But I've seen you writing late at night." It's letters. To my sister, the one who died." Lila's breath caught. "Oh." "Started after you came. Felt like maybe she'd want to know that I finally did something good. Saved someone the way I couldn't save her." "You haven't saved me," Lila said gently. "You've given me the chance to save myself. There's a difference. Your mother said something similar once. Tell me more about her, please." Gideon set aside the harness. "She found me in your father's barn, half dead from a bullet wound. Should have been terrified, strange man, obviously dangerous, probably wanted by the law. Instead, she said, 'Well, you've made quite a mess of yourself, haven't you? Like I was a child who'd skinned his knee.'" Lila smiled, hearing her mother's voice in the words. She could have gotten the sheriff collected the bounty. Instead, she brought medical supplies, food, water, sat with me through the fever, told me stories while I healed fairy tales, Bible stories, even made up stories about the mountains. Said stories had power to heal what medicines couldn't reach. She told me stories too, Lila remembered, before she got sick. Said they were seeds that would grow when I needed them most. She talked about you constantly while I recovered. Her miracle child, she called you. Said you were born early, too small, weren't expected to survive. But you did. Stubborn from the start. Pa said I killed her, being born. Your father is a fool. The fever that took her had nothing to do with you. It swept through the whole valley that year, took dozens. Gideon's voice hardened, but easier for him to blame a child than admit sometimes death just comes. They worked in companionable silence for a while, then Lila asked, "The men you killed, do you regret them?" "Some. Others needed killing to stop them from worse." "How do you live with it?" "By trying to balance the scales, save more than I took, protect more than I destroyed." He looked at her. "You're part of that balance. That's a heavy weight to put on someone." "Not weight, purpose. We all need purpose." "What's mine?" "That's for you to decide, but from what I've seen, you're meant to teach others what you've learned, that strength can be quiet, that survival isn't just about violence, that broken things can be mended." That night, Lila wrote in her journal, not sketches this time, but words. Plans for teaching ideas for lessons that combine traditional knowledge with modern education. She wrote until her candle burned low, then sat in darkness listening to the wind sing through the pines. A sound made her freeze, not the wind. Footsteps on the porch, careful but not quite silent enough. She reached for the revolver Running Elk had insisted she keep close, then heard a familiar voice. "Don't shoot, child. It's Tom." She unbarred the door to find Tom Bennett, but not alone. With him was a young woman heavily pregnant and clearly exhausted. "This is my sister Emma," Tom said quickly. "Her husband, he beats her, like your father did you. I couldn't leave her there anymore." Emma looked up with terrified eyes. "Tom said you'd understand. Said Mr. Maddox might help. I'm sorry, I know it's late. I know we shouldn't—" "Come in," Lila said immediately. "Gideon?" "We have guests." Gideon appeared, taking in the situation with one glance. "How far behind is the husband?" "Maybe an hour," Tom said. "He was drunk when we left, but he'll sober up enough to follow." "Running Elk," Gideon called up to the loft. "We have trouble coming." The old man descended, looked at Emma's condition, and immediately went to heat water. "How far along is some—" "8 months," Emma whispered. "Maybe more." "Too far to travel hard," Running Elk said. "She stays here." "Her husband has legal right," Tom started. "Not on this mountain," Gideon said flatly. "My land, my rules." They prepared quickly. Emma was settled in Lila's room with the door barred. Tom and Gideon took positions by the windows. Running Elk prepared medical supplies in case they were needed. Lila sat with Emma holding her hand as contractions started, brought on by stress and the difficult journey. "This is my fault," Emma moaned. "I should have endured—" "No," Lila said firmly. "Never apologize for escaping abuse. Never." The husband arrived with 3 friends, drunk and belligerent. "I know she's in there," he shouted. "That's my wife, my property." "Interesting word choice," Gideon called back. "Property. Like my land here is my property, and you're trespassing on it. I'll get the sheriff." "Go ahead. He knows better than to come here again." What followed was a tense standoff. The husband and his friends tried to approach several times, but warning shots from Gideon and Tom drove them back. Finally, as dawn approached and Emma's labor intensified, they retreated. "They'll be back," Tom said grimly. "Let them," Gideon replied. "By then we'll have reinforcements." He was right. Miss Josie arrived with the morning light summoned by some mountain telegraph Lila didn't understand. With her came 2 other women wives from mountain families who had their own experiences with violent men. "No man hurts a birthing woman on our watch," one said firmly, cradling a rifle with practiced ease. Emma's son was born just after noon, healthy and loud. As she held him, tears streaming down her face, she looked at Lila. "What do I do now? Where do I go?" "For now you stay here," Lila said. "Heal, get strong. Then we figure out the rest." "But legally—" "There are ways around law when law fails justice," Miss Josie said. "I know a judge in Denver. Good man. He can arrange a divorce on grounds of abandonment. But I abandoned him." "No," Gideon said from the doorway. "He abandoned his duty as a husband the first time he raised his hand to you. The rest is just paperwork." That evening, as Emma slept with her baby, Tom pulled Lila aside. "Thank you. I didn't know where else to turn." "You did right. This is what the mountain's for, shelter for those who need it." Is that what it gave you, shelter? Lila considered. No, it gave me more. It gave me myself. Over the next days, Emma recovered while plans were made. The mountain women created a network, one staying with Emma at all times. Her husband returned twice more, but faced with armed women who knew their rights and weren't afraid to defend them. He eventually gave up. Coward, Tom spat. Only brave when facing someone weaker. Most bullies are, Gideon observed. Miss Josie handled the legal aspects, using her connections to file papers in Denver. Within 2 weeks, Emma had a legal separation and a promise of divorce proceedings. I don't know how to thank you, Emma told Lila. Then don't. Just heal. And when you're strong enough, help someone else do the same. Winter deepened. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, creating insulation, but also isolation. The paths to town became impassable, except for the most determined travelers. But the cabin was warm, full of life and purpose. Emma proved to have a gift for weaving, teaching Lila to work the small loom Gideon had stored in the barn. Was my grandmother's, he admitted when asked. Brought it from Texas. Don't know why. You knew why, Running Elk said. Just didn't know you knew. The women worked together through the short winter days, creating blankets and cloth, while Emma's baby thrived on mountain air and mother's milk. Tom visited when weather allowed, bringing supplies and news from below. Your father's drinking himself to death, he reported one day. Sheriff's under investigation by federal marshals. Someone sent those fraud papers after all. Gideon looked innocent. Couldn't say who would do such a thing. The garrison gang cleared out, went south to easier pickings. Tom paused. And there's talk in town. About you, Lila. About the teaching plan. What kind of talk? Mixed. Some say it's improper a young woman living up here. Others say it's about time someone offered education to the mountain children. Miss Josie's been vocal in support. Let them talk, like Lila said. Come spring, I'll prove myself through action, not words. But spring seemed far away as December deepened toward Christmas. The cabin took on a festive air, despite or perhaps because of their isolation. Running Elk taught them traditional winter songs. Emma decorated with pine boughs and dried berries. Even Gideon contributed, carving small wooden figures that turned out to be surprisingly delicate. Hidden talents, Lila teased, admiring a tiny deer. Man needs hobbies besides brooding, he replied, almost smiling. On Christmas Eve, they gathered around the fire, their strange chosen family. Running Elk told stories of winters past. Emma sang lullabies to her son. Tom, visiting for the holiday, played a harmonica he'd hidden in his pocket. Miss Josie had brought a cake, somehow managing it up the treacherous trail. This is the first Christmas I've felt safe in years, Emma said softly. This is the first Christmas I've celebrated in 8 years, Gideon admitted. This is the first Christmas I've felt like I had a family since Ma died, Leela added. They sat in comfortable silence watching the fire, each lost in thoughts of how they'd come to this moment. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, warmth and light held the darkness at bay. I have something for you, Gideon told Lila, producing a wrapped package. Inside was a leather satchel, beautifully crafted with her initials tooled into the flap, but not LB for Lila Boone. LS, she asked. Lila Sullivan, your mother's maiden name. Thought you might want to claim it. Tears blurred her vision. It's perfect. For your teaching supplies, he explained unnecessarily. Come spring. I have something too. She handed him her journal, filled now with sketches, but not of flowers. Of him teaching her to milk. Of Running Elk demonstrating knots. Of Emma and her baby. Of their strange household going about daily tasks. The story of us. Gideon turned pages slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he said roughly, It's good. Better than good. There's more, Lila said. Tom, tell them about the newspaper. Tom grinned. Editor in Denver saw some of Lila's sketches and writings I shared with permission, he added quickly. Wants to publish them. Stories of mountain life. Real stories, not the sensational trash usually printed. Published. Lila stared at him. Paying publication. Not much, but enough to prove you're more than just some mountain girl. You're a chronicler of truth. The letter from the Denver newspaper arrived with the January thaw carried up the mountain by Tom through knee-deep snow. Lila's hands trembled as she read the editor's words aloud to the assembled household. Your pieces on mountain life show remarkable insight and artistic skill. We would like to offer you a regular position as correspondent with monthly submissions of both written accounts and illustrations. Payment of $15 per publication with potential for increase based on reader response. $15, Emma breathed. That's more than most teachers make. It's a beginning, Gideon said quietly, but Lila caught the pride in his eyes. That night she sat with her new leather satchel, organizing her sketches and writings. Everything had changed since that October morning when her father had sold her. She'd thought she was being condemned to suffering. Instead, she'd been released into possibility. A crash from outside shattered her contemplation. Then shouting not English but Spanish, rapid and panicked. Gideon was already moving rifle in hand, but when he opened the door, it wasn't threats that greeted them. A Mexican family stood in the snow. Father, mother, 3 children, all clearly exhausted and terrified. The father held his side blood seeping between his fingers. Por favor, the mother begged. Please help. Inside, Gideon commanded immediately. Running elk need your medicine bag. The story came out in broken English and Spanish as they tended the father's wound, a knife/deep but not fatal. They were fleeing north seeking family in Wyoming, but they'd been attacked by bandits who'd taken their wagon, their supplies, everything. We saw smoke. The eldest child, a girl about 12, explained. Papa said maybe good people, maybe help. Your papa was right, Lila assured her, bringing blankets for the younger children. The family's name was Hernandez. Miguel the father had been a vaquero until drought killed the ranch he worked. Rosa the mother kept touching her children as if reassuring herself they were real. The children, Maria Carlos and little Ana, watched everything with wide, dark eyes. You're safe here, Emma told Rosa in careful Spanish she'd learned from her grandmother. These are good people. But we have nothing to pay, Miguel protested weakly. Payment isn't necessary for human decency, Gideon said flatly. Rest. Heal. We'll figure out the rest later. The cabin, already full with its unusual household, somehow expanded to accommodate the Hernandez family. Bedrolls were arranged, spaces reorganized. The children, after initial shyness, gravitated toward Lila when they saw her sketching. You make pictures, Maria asked. I try. Would you like to learn? The girl's face lit up. Yes, please. That became the pattern. While Miguel recovered, Lila taught the children not just drawing, but letters and numbers, too. She discovered Maria was quick-witted, but had never been to school. Carlos 8 could already do figures in his head from helping his father with livestock counts. Even little Ana, only 5, proved eager to learn. You're a natural teacher, Rosa observed, watching Lila work with infinite patience as Ana struggled with holding a pencil correctly. They're good students, Lila replied, but she felt the truth in Rosa's words. This was what she was meant to do. One evening, as the children practiced their letters, Running Elk pulled Gideon aside. Their quiet conversation carried just enough for Lila to hear. The bandits they described sounds like the Garrison gang found a new territory. And new victims, Gideon replied grimly, targeting travelers who can't go to the law. Someone should do something. Not our fight. Isn't it? They attacked Tom, tried to take Lila. Now, this family, when does it become our fight? Gideon didn't answer, but Lila saw his jaw tighten the way it did when he was thinking hard about something he'd rather avoid. February brought 2 significant events. First, Lila turned 17 and the Emancipation Papers became legal. She was officially free, belonging to no one but herself. The celebration was quiet but meaningful. A cake from Miss Josie, a new shawl woven by Emma, a leather-bound blank book from Gideon. For your teaching notes, as he explained, or whatever else needs writing. The second event was less celebratory. Tom arrived with news that Jed Boone had been found dead in an alley, frozen after a drinking binge. I should feel something, Lila said, staring at the fire. He was my father. Blood doesn't always mean family, Running Elk observed. And family doesn't always mean blood. Do you want to go to the burial? Gideon asked. No, he buried himself years ago. This is just the ground catching up. But that night, she found herself crying not for the father who died, but for the father she'd never had. Gideon found her on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, watching stars wheel overhead. Grief is strange, he said, joining her. Sometimes we mourn what was, sometimes what wasn't. I keep thinking I should have tried harder, been better. Maybe if I hadn't burned that cornbread. Stop. His voice was firm but gentle. His failures weren't your fault. A parent's job is to love their child regardless. He failed that job. You surviving despite his failure, that's your victory, not your shame. Is that why you write to your dead sister, to claim victory over the failure to save her? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. I write to her because she would have loved you, would have loved your strength, your refusal to break. I tell her about you so somewhere, somehow, she knows good still exists. What was her name? Isabella, Izzy. She was 14 when she died. Loved to draw, like you. They sat in comfortable silence, two orphans who'd found their own way to family. Finally, Lila asked, what do we do about the Garrison gang? They'll keep hurting people. What do you think we should do? I think we should stop them, but I don't know how. I might, Gideon said slowly, but it would be dangerous, and it would mean becoming someone I've tried to leave behind. Or it would mean using who you were to protect who we are now. He looked at her, surprised by the wisdom. When did you become so insightful? Tuesdays, she replied, managing a small smile. I schedule all my insights for Tuesdays. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, a well-dressed man from Denver who introduced himself as James Morrison, attorney at law. I'm here about the Boone estate, he announced. What estate? Layla asked. Pa drank everything away. Not everything. There's the matter of your mother's family land, 20 acres outside Denver. It's been in dispute, but with your father's death and your legal emancipation, it passes to you. Lila stared at him. I own land. Potentially valuable land given Denver's growth. Several parties have expressed interest in purchasing. He named a sum that made everyone's eyes widen. Of course, you could also develop it yourself. The choice is yours. I need time to think. Of course. I'll be staying in town for a week. Send word when you've decided. After he left, the cabin buzzed with discussion. The money from selling would set Lila up for life. She could build a proper school, help the Hernandez family get established, ensure Emma's security. But it was Ma's family land, she said, torn. Selling it feels like betraying her memory. Your mother was practical, Miss Josie said. She'd want you to do what's best for your future. Maybe there's another option, Tom suggested. Lease it instead of selling. Keep ownership but generate income. That night, Lila found Gideon in the barn checking on a goat that had been acting poorly. What would you do? She asked. Doesn't matter what I'd do. It's your choice. But I value your opinion. He straightened, studying her. I think your mother would want you to use it to help others, same as she helped me. How you do that selling, leasing, developing, that's tactics. The strategy is what matters. And the strategy is becoming who you're meant to be. Everything else serves that purpose. The next few days were filled with planning. Miguel, recovering well, proved to have experience in construction. I could help build, he offered. If you keep the land, develop it, is how I pay debt. There is no debt, Layla insisted. There's always debt when someone saves your family, Miguel replied with dignity. Let me repay with work, not money. Meanwhile, the children continued their lessons. Maria showed real talent for writing, creating little stories about their journey. Carlos revealed an engineer's mind, figuring out better ways to organize the cabin's limited space. Anna just bloomed, chattering and improving English, no longer the silent, frightened child who'd arrived. One afternoon, while Lila worked with the children, riders approached. Everyone tensed, but it was Miss Josie with unexpected companions, 3 women from town, all with children in tow. We heard about your teaching, one said hesitantly. Our children need education, but we can't afford the town school, and it's too far anyway. Would you consider taking them on? Another asked. We could pay a little eggs preserves, whatever we have. Lila looked at the expectant faces of the children, then at Gideon, who nodded slightly. I'd be honored, but I'm still learning myself. You know more than they do now, the first woman said practically. That's enough to start. So Lila's mountain school began even before winter ended. 3 days a week, children arrived for lessons. The cabin's main room became a classroom. Emma helped with the youngest ones while continuing her weaving. Rosa cooked for everyone, creating miracles from simple ingredients. Even Running Elk participated, teaching traditional skills and stories. You've created something special, Miss Josie observed one day, watching a mixed group of children, white Mexican, even 2 Ute children from Running Elk's connections working together on their letters. We've created it, Lila corrected, all of us together. But the shadow of the Garrison gang still loomed. Reports came of more attacks on travelers. The federal marshal had arrested Sheriff McKenna, but his replacement seemed equally unwilling to pursue bandits in the mountains. Someone needs to stop them, Tom said one evening. His usual cheerfulness replaced by anger. They robbed the widow Martinez yesterday, took everything she had saved for her son's medicine. Enough, Gideon said quietly. Running Elk? You still have connections with the Warrior Society. The old man nodded slowly. Some. Why? Because it's time to remind the Garrison gang why smart predators don't hunt in these mountains. What followed was a week of planning. Gideon transformed before their eyes, the quiet homesteader replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. He met with Running Elk's contacts, young Ute men who were tired of seeing their people victimized. Tom recruited others from town men who'd lost to the gang's predations. You're building an army, Lila observed. I'm building a deterrent, Gideon corrected. The gang thinks these mountains are easy pickings. We're going to change their minds. I want to help. You are helping. You're giving people something worth fighting for, a future where their children can learn without fear. But Lila wasn't satisfied with staying behind. She'd learned to shoot, to track, to survive. When Gideon's group rode out one dawn, she followed at a distance, despite strict orders to stay at the cabin. She tracked them to a valley where the Garrison gang had made camp. From her hidden position, she watched Gideon's group surround the bandits. There was no dramatic fight. Faced with superior numbers and position, the gang surrendered quickly. But then things went wrong. One bandit, younger than the others, made a break for it. He ran directly toward Lila's hiding spot. Without thinking, she stepped out, revolver raised. Stop! The bandit skidded to a halt, then laughed. It's the Boone girl, the one we came for before. Well, well. Not anymore, Lila said steadily. I'm Lila Sullivan now. And you're going to turn around and walk back to the others. Or what? You'll shoot me, little girl. If necessary. Something in her voice made him pause. This wasn't the terrified girl they'd expected to find at Gideon's cabin months ago. This was someone who'd found her strength. You won't shoot, he said, but uncertainty colored his voice. Try me. They stood frozen for a moment, then Gideon's voice cut through the tension. Lila, lower the gun. Marcus walked toward me slowly. The bandit Marcus apparently obeyed, casting one last look at Lila. You've changed, girl. Everything changes, Lila replied. Even you might if you live long enough. Later, as the gang was led away to be turned over to federal marshals, Gideon confronted her. You disobeyed direct orders. Yes, you could have been killed. But I wasn't. That's not the point. Isn't it? You're always saying I need to be able to protect myself. Well, I did. Running Elk interrupted their argument. The girl did well. Foolish, but well. She's becoming a warrior in her own way. She's becoming a teacher, Gideon corrected firmly. Sometimes they're the same thing, Lila said. Teaching people to read is teaching them to fight ignorance. Teaching them to think is teaching them to fight oppression. When did you become a philosopher? Gideon asked, exasperated but clearly proud. Thursdays. Tuesdays are for insights. Thursdays for philosophy. With the Garrison gang dealt with, the mountains felt safer. More families brought their children for lessons. The Hernandez family decided to stay, Miguel working with Gideon to build an addition to the cabin for the growing school. Spring arrived with explosive beauty. The meadow around the cabin erupted with wildflowers, the same ones Lila used to sketch in secret, now blooming freely around her chosen home. She stood among them one morning, journal in hand, when she heard horses approaching. It was Morrison, the lawyer from Denver, returning with papers. "You've decided about the land." "Yes," Lila said firmly. "I want to build a school there. A real school free for those who can't pay, supported by leasing part of the land for development." "That's ambitious." "I've learned to be ambitious." She signed the papers with her new name, Lila Sullivan, and felt another chain of her past break away. As Morrison left, Emma approached with her son on her hip. The divorce had been finalized, and she'd taken back her maiden name too. "We're all becoming ourselves, aren't we?" she observed. "We're becoming who we were always meant to be," Lila agreed. The school construction would take time, but Lila continued teaching in the cabin. Her published pieces in the Denver paper brought attention mostly positive. Letters arrived from readers thanking her for showing mountain life as it really was, not the sensationalized version usually portrayed. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman in Boston asking if Lila would consider writing a book about her experiences. "Your story of transformation and education could inspire others," she wrote. "A book," Lila mused, showing the letter to Gideon. "You have enough material," he pointed out, gesturing to her journals. "But I'm still living the story. How can I write the ending when I don't know what it is?" "Stories don't really end," Running Elk said from his corner. "They just pause at good moments. This might be one." That evening, the whole household gathered for dinner, Gideon, Running Elk, Emma, and her son, the Hernandez family, Tom, visiting from town. Miss Josie up for her weekly visit. The table expanded with Miguel's carpentry skills groaned under the weight of food. Conversation flowed in 3 languages, sometimes all at once. "This is my family," Lila thought, looking around the table. Not the family she'd been born to, but the one she'd chosen and who'd chosen her in return. After dinner, as often happened, the children begged for a story. Lila obliged, telling them about a girl who'd been sold like property, but found freedom in the mountains. The younger ones didn't realize it was her own story transformed into a fairy tale with a happy ending. "And did she marry the prince?" little Anna asked. "There was no prince," Lila said. "She didn't need one. She saved herself." "That's not how stories go," Carlos protested. "It's how this one goes," Lila replied firmly. "The best stories are the ones where people save themselves, then help save others." Later, after the children were asleep, Lila found Gideon on the porch, whittling by moonlight. She sat beside him, comfortable in the silence they'd learned to share. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "How everything's changed. Your quiet mountain is now full of people." "Change was needed," he replied. "I was dying up here, just too stubborn to admit it. You brought life back. We brought it together." He set down his whittling, looking at her with those pale eyes that had once seemed so cold, but now held warmth she'd helped kindle. "Your mother would be so proud." "I hope so. I know so. You've become everything she hoped: strong, independent, compassionate. You've taken the worst thing that could happen and transformed it into purpose." "I had help," Lila said, thinking of everyone who'd contributed to her transformation. "We all need help. The lucky ones get it. The smart ones accept it," Lila corrected. They sat watching stars wheel overhead, these 2 damaged souls who'd found healing in each other's company. Not romantic love, that wasn't their story. Instead, they'd found something rarer: the love of chosen family, of mutual respect, of shared purpose. "I've been thinking," Gideon said, "about the school in Denver. You'll need someone to manage the mountain school while you're setting that up." Emma's agreed to help. "And Rosa wants to teach Spanish to the children." "Good. But you'll also need protection. The Garrison gang is gone, but there are always others." "Are you offering—" "I'm offering to teach Miguel and some of the other men what I know. Create a network of protection for the school, for the families who come here. From gunfighter to protector of education," Lila said with a smile. "That's quite a transformation." "We're all transforming. That's what you've taught us, that change is possible even for those who thought they were too broken to mend." A wolf howled in the distance, answered by another. Once that sound would have frightened Lila. Now it was just part of the mountain's music, no more threatening than the wind in the pines. "I got another letter today," she said, "from a girl in Texas. Her father's trying to marry her off to settle a debt. She read my story in the paper, wants to know if there's hope. What did you tell her? I haven't answered yet. What do I say to someone in that situation? Gideon was quiet for a moment. Tell her there's always hope, but sometimes it comes disguised as the worst thing imaginable. Tell her to be ready to recognize salvation even when it looks like damnation. That's what you were for me, wasn't it? Salvation disguised as sale. We saved each other, Gideon corrected. That's the best kind of salvation, mutual. As spring deepened toward summer, the mountain school flourished. More families came drawn by the promise of education that didn't judge their poverty or origins. The children learned not just letters and numbers, but practical skills. How to preserve food, tend animals, read weather signs, respect the land and each other. Lila's published pieces brought modest fame. Letters arrived from across the territory, some critical but most supportive. She answered them all, especially the ones from young women in situations similar to what hers had been. One day in late May, as she taught a lesson on local plants combining Running Elk's traditional knowledge with botanical science from Gideon's books, she realized this was exactly where she belonged. Not in her father's house, trapped and worthless. Not even in Denver's proposed school, though she'd build that too. But here in this cabin on this mountain, surrounded by chosen family and eager students. Miss Lila, Maria called, look what I wrote. The girl had created a story about a hawk with a broken wing who learned to fly again. It was clearly inspired by the injured hawk Lila had found and nursed back to health over the winter, the one that now visited regularly, perching on the fence posts as if checking on its saviors. It's beautiful, Lila told her. Would you like to illustrate it? We could send it to the newspaper. Maria's eyes widened. They would publish something I wrote, if it's good enough. And this is... As the children worked on their projects, Lila thought about the letter she'd write to that girl in Texas. She'd tell her about transformation, about finding strength in unexpected places. She'd tell her that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways to something better, but we have to be brave enough to walk through them. Most importantly, she'd tell her that she wasn't alone, that there were people who understood who'd survived similar situations and were willing to help others do the same. You're thinking deep thoughts, Emma observed, bouncing her son on her hip. I'm thinking about purpose, Lila replied. How we find it, how we fulfill it. And I think I'm living mine. That evening, as the students headed home and the household settled into its evening routines, Lila climbed to her favorite spot, a rocky outcrop above the cabin that gave a view of the entire valley. The sunset painted everything gold and purple, and she could see the paths worn by her students coming and going, the garden Miguel had helped plant, the addition taking shape under Tom's occasional supervision. Below, she could hear Gideon and Running Elk discussing plans for a proper well. Emma's laughter drifted up as she played with the Hernandez children. Normal sounds of a functioning household, a functioning life. She opened her journal and began to write not sketches this time, but the beginning of the book the Boston woman had suggested. She'd tell her story, but more importantly, she'd tell the story of all the broken people who'd found wholeness here in these mountains. Chapter 1, she wrote. The day my father sold me was the day my real life began. The summer sun had barely crested the peaks when the telegram arrived, carried by a breathless Tom who'd ridden through the night. Lila's hands trembled as she read it aloud to the assembled household. Federal judge requests your presence. Stop. Jed Boone's will contested. Stop. Claims you were illegally sold. Stop. Hearing Tuesday. Stop. But he's dead, Emma said, confused. How can he contest anything? It's not him, Gideon said grimly. Someone else is making the claim. Someone who stands to gain. The mystery was solved when Morrison, the Denver lawyer, arrived that afternoon with more information. Your father had a brother in Kansas, Eugene Boone. He's claiming that since the sale was illegal, you were still your father's legal daughter when he died, making Eugene your guardian and heir to your mother's land. I've never even met him, Lila protested. Doesn't matter. Law says unmarried women need male guardians. Without the sale being legal, you'd have passed from your father to his nearest male relative. But the Emancipation Papers are based on the sale being valid. If the sale is voided, so is your freedom. The cabin fell silent as the implications sank in. Everything Lila had built, everything she'd become, could be stripped away by a man she'd never met claiming rights he'd never earned. "We'll fight it," Gideon said firmly. "We have witnesses to the sale." "The uncle has witnesses saying Jed was drunk, not in his right mind," Morrison replied, "and he has Sheriff McKenna willing to testify that Gideon coerced the sale." "McKenna's in federal prison," Tom protested. "Doesn't mean he won't testify, probably hoping for a reduced sentence." Lila stood abruptly, walking to the window. The children were playing in the meadow, their laughter carrying on the mountain breeze. Her students, her purpose, her life, all of it hanging by the thread of legal technicalities. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. "We go to court," Morrison said. "Present our case, hope the judge sees the truth." "Truth doesn't always matter in court," Running Elk observed. "Justice and law aren't always the same thing." Over the next days they prepared for battle. Miss Josie gathered witnesses from town. Tom documented everything he'd observed. Even the Hernandez family prepared statements, though Morrison warned their testimony might not be accepted. "You're Mexican nationals," he explained apologetically. "Some judges don't consider that valid testimony." "But we saw how she was treated," Rosa protested. "We know what Mr. Gideon saved her from." The night before the hearing, Lila couldn't sleep. She found Gideon on the porch, keeping his usual watch. "Scared?" he asked. "Terrified. Everything I've built could disappear tomorrow." "No," he said firmly. "What you've built is in here." He tapped his chest, and here he tapped his temple. "They can't take that no matter what papers say. But they can take me away from here, from you, from everyone." "Then we don't let them." "How? If the law says—" "There are other kinds of law," Gideon said quietly. "Mountain law, the kind that says a person belongs where they choose to belong. You're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting we go to court, make our case, and see what happens. But I'm also saying that if law fails justice, we might have to make our own." The courthouse in Red Hollow was packed when they arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out to watch the spectacle. Lila recognized faces from that October morning when she'd been sold some sympathetic others eager for drama. Eugene Boone looked like a heavier, meaner version of her father. He sat with a satisfied smirk, clearly confident in his case. Beside him sat Sheriff McKenna in chains and a lawyer from Kansas who looked like he ate children for breakfast. The judge imported from Denver for the federal case was an older man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This court will determine the validity of the sale of Lila Boone Sullivan?" Lila interrupted. "My name is Lila Sullivan." The judge peered over his spectacles. "The legal matter concerns Lila Boone. You may call yourself whatever you wish, but the law recognizes you as Boone." It was a bad beginning. Eugene's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a drunk, desperate man coerced by the notorious Gideon Maddox into selling his precious daughter. Sheriff McKenna testified that he'd always suspected coercion, but had been threatened into silence. "Mr. Maddox showed me papers threatening fraud charges," McKenna said, managing to look both righteous and persecuted. "I feared for my life if I didn't comply." "You feared for your freedom when your corruption was exposed," Gideon said loudly. "Mr. Maddox, you'll have your turn," the judge warned. When Morrison presented their case, the townspeople who testified were nervous, clearly intimidated by the formal setting. Yes, they'd seen the sale, but maybe Jed had been drunk. Maybe there had been some pressure. Memory was a funny thing, wasn't it? Only Miss Josie stood firm. "I saw exactly what happened. Jed Boone sold his daughter like livestock in front of the entire town because he wanted a rifle more than a child. Anyone who says different is lying or blind." "You're a spinster, aren't you, Miss Walker?" Eugene's lawyer asked smoothly. "Never had children of your own." "What does that have to do with anything?" "Just establishing that you might not understand a father's love, his desire to protect his daughter." "I understand cruelty when I see it," Miss Josie shot back, "and I saw 16 years of it. But the damage was done. An unmarried woman's testimony about family matters carried less weight, and everyone knew it." Tom testified next, describing the attack by the Garrison gang, how Lila had been learning and teaching at the cabin. But Eugene's lawyer twisted it. So she was present during violence, exposed to dangerous men. That hardly sounds like a safe environment for a young lady. She was teaching children, Tom protested, running a school, without any certification or proper authority. Just a young girl playing teacher while living with a dangerous man. Lila watched it all with growing despair. The truth was being twisted, reshaped into something ugly. She looked at Gideon, saw his jaw clenched so tight she thought his teeth might crack. Finally, it was her turn to testify. She stood smoothing her dress, one Emma had made respectable but simple. "Miss Boone," the judge began. "Sullivan," she corrected again. "Young lady, you will answer to your legal name." "Then I won't answer at all." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face reddened. "You're in contempt of court." "This court is in contempt of justice," Lila replied steadily. "You're trying to decide my fate based on the testimony of men who never cared for me while dismissing the words of those who actually know me." "Young lady, I'm not a young lady. I'm a teacher. I'm a writer. I'm a person who has built a life despite everyone trying to tear it down. My father sold me for a rifle and $20 worth of supplies. That was the greatest kindness he ever did me because it freed me from his cruelty. Your uncle says, my uncle who I've never met, who never wrote, never visited, never cared until there was land involved." Lila's voice rose. "He wants my mother's land, not me, just like my father wanted a rifle, not a daughter. The law says I'm property. The law says I can be sold, traded, inherited like furniture. The law is wrong." The judge slammed his gavel. "That's enough. You're clearly emotional, not thinking clearly." "Well, I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have." She turned to face the packed courtroom. "All of you saw what happened that October morning. You saw my father shame me, sell me, celebrate getting that rifle. You watched and did nothing. Now you want to pretend it was something else because the truth makes you uncomfortable. Sit down, Miss Boone." "No." She remained standing. "If you give me to Eugene Boone, you're selling me again, and this time you're all complicit." The judge was about to respond when a commotion erupted at the back of the courtroom. The Hernandez family entered, but not alone. With them were dozens of Mountain families, the parents of Lila's students. "We want to speak," Miguel announced. "This is a closed hearing," the judge protested. "Not anymore," said a Mountain woman, Mrs. Cooper, whose 3 children Lila taught. "This girl teaches our children. She's given them opportunity we never had. You're not taking her without hearing from us." "I'll clear the courtroom," the judge threatened. "Try it," said another man, Mr. Jenkins, whose daughter had learned to read in just 3 months under Lila's teaching. "We mountain folk might not know law, but we know right from wrong." The judge looked uncertain. The courtroom was packed, and clearing it would require force he didn't have available. "Your Honor?" Morrison stood quickly. "These people are character witnesses. Surely their testimony is relevant. This is highly irregular." "So is selling a human being," Running Elk said from his seat. "But that happened. Now we're here to stop it from happening again." One by one, the Mountain families spoke. They told of children learning to read, of Lila's patience and dedication, of the school she'd built from nothing. They spoke of her kindness to the Hernandez family, her courage during the Garrison gang attack, her determination to educate anyone willing to learn. "She saved my son," a woman said quietly. "Not from bandits or violence, but from ignorance. He can read now. Write his name, do figures. That's salvation that lasts." Eugene Boone's lawyer tried to object, but the testimonies kept coming. Even some townspeople shamed by Lila's words, and the Mountain family's devotion began to speak up. "I saw Jed hit her," one admitted, "many times. Saw her go hungry while he drank. She used to draw pictures," another added, "beautiful ones, but she had to hide them because he'd destroy them if he found them." The tide was turning, but Eugene made one last play. "Your Honor, regardless of all this, the law is clear. An unmarried woman needs a male guardian. If not me, then who? She can't just exist independently." The judge nodded slowly. "That is the law, unless," he looked at Lila, "unless you were to marry. A husband would become your legal guardian." The courtroom fell silent. Lila felt the walls closing in. Marriage as the price of freedom, another kind of sale. "I'll marry her," Tom said, suddenly standing. "No," Lila said firmly. "Tom, you're kind, but no. It would solve nothing. I won't trade one form of ownership for another, even with someone as good as you." The judge sighed. "Then I'm afraid the law leaves me no choice." "I have another solution." Gideon stood his presence immediately commanding attention. "Adoption." "What?" The judge looked confused. "I can legally adopt her as my daughter. She's young enough, I'm old enough. It would make me her legal guardian until she reaches 21, at which point she'd be free regardless of marriage." "That's highly unusual," the judge said slowly. "But legal." Morrison jumped in, already seeing the possibilities. "There's precedent. The Henderson case in California, the Morrison matter in Texas." Eugene's lawyer sputtered. "This is ridiculous. A man can't just adopt a grown woman." "The law says he can if she's under 21 and unmarried," Morrison countered. "It's rarely done, but it's legal." "But he bought her." "You can't buy someone, then adopt them." "The sale is being contested as invalid," Gideon said calmly. "If it's invalid, then I never bought her. I simply took in an abused girl who needed shelter. Now I'm formalizing that protection." The judge considered this, clearly intrigued by the legal maneuvering. "Miss Boone Sullivan, would you consent to this adoption?" Lila looked at Gideon, this scarred, dangerous man who'd shown her more kindness than her bloodfather ever had. She thought of the cabin, the school, the life they'd all built together. "Yes," she said clearly, "I would be honored to be Gideon Maddox's daughter." "This is preposterous," Eugene shouted. "I'm her blood kin." "Blood that never flowed for her benefit," Gideon replied coldly. "Where were you when she was hungry, when she was beaten, when she was sold like cattle?" "I didn't know." "Because you didn't care. You care now because there's money involved. Land. That's all she is to you, a path to property." "And what is she to you?" Eugene snarled. Gideon looked at Lila and his harsh features softened slightly. "She's the daughter I should have had. The family I thought I'd lost forever. She's proof that broken things can be mended if you're patient enough, careful enough, brave enough." The courtroom was silent except for some sniffling. Mrs. Cooper was openly crying. The judge cleared his throat. "This is highly unusual, but it does appear to be legal. Mr. Morrison, can you draw up the papers?" "I have them here," Morrison said, producing documents. "I anticipated this possibility." "You planned this?" Lila asked Gideon quietly. "Hoped for it," he corrected. "Seemed fitting. You saved me from dying alone on that mountain. Least I can do is save you from legal bondage." As Morrison presented the adoption papers, Eugene made one last desperate attempt. "Your Honor, this man is a killer. Everyone knows his reputation." "I was a killer," Gideon agreed, standing to face Eugene. "Killed men in wars and self-defense. And yes, sometimes for money. When I was young and stupid and thought violence was strength. But I never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, and I never hurt anyone weaker than me. Can you say the same? You who would take a girl you've never met and sell her future for profit." "I have rights." "You have greed." Gideon cut him off. "Nothing more." The judge reviewed the papers carefully. "These seem to be in order. Miss Sullivan, you're certain you consent to this?" "I'm certain." "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I hereby approve this adoption. Lila Sullivan is now legally Lila Sullivan Maddox, daughter of Gideon Maddox." The Mountain families erupted in celebration. Eugene Boone stormed out, his lawyer trailing behind. Sheriff McKenna was led back to his cell, his testimony having gained him nothing. Lila stood frozen for a moment, then ran to Gideon, throwing her arms around him. He stiffened, unused to such displays, then slowly, carefully hugged her back. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," he said roughly. "Thank you for giving me back a family." The celebration continued outside the courthouse. The Mountain families surrounded them, congratulating and planning. The school would continue. The Denver property would be developed for education. Everything Lila had worked for would proceed. "You know," Miss Josie said quietly to Gideon. Her mother would be so pleased. You think so? I know so. Mary always said you had a good heart buried under all that scar tissue. She'd be glad to know she was right. That evening, they returned to the cabin, the whole extended family, plus half the mountain community, it seemed. Emma had prepared a feast with Rose's help. The children ran wild in the meadow, their laughter echoing off the peaks. Stories were told, songs were sung, and for the first time since that October morning, Lila felt the last chains of her past truly break. So what do I call you now? She asked Gideon as they stood on the porch watching the celebration. Father Pa. Gideon's fine, he said. Titles don't matter. What matters is what's real. And what's real? This, he gestured to the gathering. Family you choose, purpose you build, life you create despite everything trying to stop you. Running Elk joined them carrying his pipe. Good day, he observed. Justice and law aligned for once. With some creative interpretation, Lila said with a smile. Best kind of interpretation, bends rules without breaking them. He puffed thoughtfully. You know this changes things. Legally, you'll inherit all this when Gideon passes. Don't bury me yet, Gideon protested. Not burying, just observing. The cabin, the land, the school, it'll all be hers. Official-like. It was always going to be hers, Gideon said. Just now it's legal. Speaking of legal, Tom approached with a letter. This came while you were at court, from that Boston publisher. Lila opened it, read quickly, then gasped. They want to publish my book, the one I've been writing about our life here. They're offering an advance of $200. That's enough to build the Denver school properly, Emma said, having overheard. It's enough for a lot of things. Lila agreed, her mind already spinning with possibilities. The party continued late into the night, but eventually families drifted home, children sleepy and content. The household settled into its familiar evening rhythm, Emma singing her son to sleep, the Hernandez family preparing for tomorrow's lessons. Running Elk, smoking his pipe by the fire. Lila sat at the table working on her book by lamplight. The adoption papers lay beside her, making everything official. She was no longer Jed Boone's unwanted daughter. She was Lila Sullivan Maddox, teacher-writer, and legal daughter of a man who'd saved her by buying her. Still writing? Gideon asked, bringing her a cup of Running Elk's tea. Trying to capture today. It feels important. It was important. You stood up to the whole system. We stood up to it, together. He sat across from her, his usual evening spot. What will you write about us, about me? The truth. That you're a good man who did bad things, then chose to do better. That you saved me not through violence, but through patience and kindness. That family isn't always blood. And yourself. What will you write about Lila? She considered this. That she was lost and got found. That she was weak and became strong. That she was sold for a rifle, but bought her freedom with courage. That's a good story. It's our story. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling the night deep around the cabin. Then Gideon said, I never thanked you properly. For what? For becoming my daughter, not just legally, but really, for making this place a home instead of just a hideout. I never thanked you properly either, for seeing me as more than what Pa said I was, for giving me space to grow. We're a pair, aren't we? Two broken people who somehow made something whole. 3. Running Elk corrected from his corner. Don't forget the old Indian who kept you both from killing yourselves with stubbornness. They laughed, the sound warm in the mountain night. As Lila prepared for bed, she stopped at her window looking out at the stars. The same stars she'd watched that first night, terrified and uncertain. Now they felt like old friends, witnesses to her transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Denver school to plan the book to finish students, to teach a community to serve. There would be those who questioned the adoption, who challenged her right to teach, who dismissed her as just a mountain girl playing at education. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. In a cabin on a mountain surrounded by chosen family, legally free and emotionally whole. The girl who'd been sold for a rifle had become a woman who couldn't be bought at any price. She thought of her mother dead these many years and whispered to the stars, I hope you're proud, Ma. I found my strength just like you said I would. and I found it in the last place anyone expected, in the hands of the man who bought me. A hawk cried in the distance, perhaps the one she'd saved, now wild and free, but still remembering kindness. Like her. Like all of them, really. Wild creatures who'd learned to trust broken things that had learned to heal. "Good night, Pa," she called softly to Gideon, trying out the word. There was a pause, then his rough voice, "Good night, daughter." The word wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and safe and real. She was someone's daughter again, not by blood or force, but by choice. And that she realized made it more precious than any birthright could ever be. In the morning, there would be lessons to teach and futures to build. But tonight, Lila Sullivan Maddox, teacher, writer, daughter by choice, slept peacefully in her mountain home, her freedom secured not by law alone, but by the fierce love of a family that had chosen each other despite everything the world had tried to put between them. The last entry in her journal that night was simple. "Today I was legally adopted by the man who bought me. Today I officially became free. Today our real story begins." Outside, snow began to fall unseasonably early for summer, the mountains making their own rules as always. By morning, the meadow would be dusted white, transformed into something new and beautiful. Like her. Like all of them. The cabin stood strong against the night smoke rising from its chimney windows, glowing with warmth. Inside, a family not of blood, but of choice, settled into sleep, each carrying their own scars, but healing together, proving that sometimes the worst moments in life are just doorways to something better, if you're brave enough to walk through them. And in a small room at the back of the cabin, a young woman who'd once been sold for a rifle dreamed of teaching children to read, of books to be written, of futures to be built. She dreamed of freedom, and for the first time in her life, the dream was real.